single mom sat alone at a funeral. The mafia boss said, "Let me hold your hand." The chapel smelled of lilies and judgment. Elena Marlowe sat in the last pew, a solitary island in a sea of dark suits and averted gazes. The air was thick with a cloying sweetness from the flowers choking the altar, and the heavy silence was broken only by the rustle of programs and the occasional theatrical sniffle from an aunt who hadn't spoken to her in 7 years. On her lap, her 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, fidgeted with the lace hem of her black dress. "Mommy," Sophie whispered, her small voice cutting through the organ's low drone. "Why is Aunt Clara looking at us like that?" Elena's hand instinctively tightened on Sophie's knee. "She's just sad, baby. Everyone is sad today." But they weren't just sad, they were angry. Elena could feel the weight of their resentment, a heavy shroud as oppressive as her grief. She was the family disgrace, the cautionary tale, the girl who got pregnant at 19, who ran off with a musician who left her 2 years later, who had the audacity to come back and raise a child alone. And now, she had the audacity to mourn the brother who, like the rest of them, had mostly kept his distance. She looked at the closed casket at the front of the church. Caleb. Her eyes burned, but the tears wouldn't come. Not here, not in front of them. Her grief was a complicated, tangled thing, choked by regret. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly 4 years. Their last conversation had been a shouted match over a crackling phone line, him asking for money, her screaming that she didn't have any, that she had a daughter to feed. He had hung up. She hadn't known it was the last time. Now, sitting in this cold, sterile room, she was just the single mom at the funeral, the stain on the family's respectable veneer. The front pews were filled with her parents, her aunts, her uncles, a rigid blockade of righteousness. No one had made room for her. No one had even met her gaze. They had left her here, in the back, alone. The heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel groaned open, letting in a sliver of gray, rainy light. A man stepped inside. The atmosphere in the room didn't just shift, it froze. The whispers stopped, the coughing ceased. Even the organist seemed to falter, the music thinning for a beat. He was not from their world. The men in her family wore suits that were either too big or too tight, bought off the rack for occasions just like this. This man's suit was black, exquisitely tailored, and looked like it cost more than her apartment. He was tall, with dark hair swept back from a face that looked carved from hard angles and shadows. He moved with a liquid, unnerving grace, his presence radiating a stillness that was more potent than any noise. He was elegant, he was dark, he was mysterious. Elena watched, breathless, as he scanned the room. His gaze passed over the front pews, over her judgmental family, and settled, with deliberate weight, on her. For a heart-stopping second, she was certain he had the wrong funeral. But he moved, his polished shoes making no sound on the marble floor. He didn't walk toward the front. He didn't greet the family. He walked down the center aisle, turned, and stopped at her pew. The empty space beside her suddenly felt vast, a vacuum pulling him in. He slid into the pew. The wood creaked under his weight. Elena could feel the heat of him. Though he wasn't touching her, he smelled of expensive wool, clean soap, and something cold and metallic, like the rainy air he'd brought in with him. Sophie stopped fidgeting and stared at him with wide, curious eyes. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She stared straight ahead, at the lilies, at the casket. She could feel every eye in the chapel burning into the back of her head, the collective shock of her family a palpable force. The man leaned toward her. She flinched, turning her head just slightly. His profile was sharp, his jaw tight. His voice was a low, quiet rumble meant only for her, but it seemed to command the silence of the entire room. "Let me hold your hand." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a quiet command. Before she could process it, before she could even think to refuse, his hand was over hers. It was large, warm, and surprisingly steady. His fingers didn't just rest on hers, they enveloped them. A firm, grounding pressure that stopped the trembling she hadn't even realized had started. He didn't look at her. He stared forward. A silent, imposing sentinel in the last row. The service began. The pastor spoke of a man Elena barely recognized, a loyal friend, a good son. Elena didn't hear the words. She felt the solid weight of the stranger's hand, an anchor in the cold, judgmental sea. And for the first time that day, she let the tears fall, silent and hot, for the brother she had lost twice. The graveside service was a brief, windswept affair under a sky that threatened to open up. Elena stood at the back, holding a sleepy Sophie, the wet grass seeping into her thin-soled shoes. Her family huddled together near the casket, a tight, exclusive circle of grief. When it was over, they filed past her, one by one, heading for the line of black cars. Her mother's eyes were red, but her mouth was a thin, hard line. She looked right through Elena, as if she were a ghost. Elena waited until the last car pulled away, leaving her and Sophie alone by the freshly turned earth. "It's cold, Mommy." "I know, baby, we'll go in a minute." A car door closed, softly, nearby. She turned. The man from the chapel was standing by a long, black sedan parked on the perimeter road. He was alone. He walked toward her, his posture respectful, his hands clasped behind his back. Elena instinctively pulled Sophie closer. The comfort he had offered in the chapel had evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of a prey animal. The man was a predator. Her instincts screamed it. He stopped a respectful 5 feet away. "Mrs. Marlowe," he said. His voice was smoother now, without the chapel's acoustics. "It's Miss," she corrected, her voice tight. He nodded, a fractional dip of his head. "Miss Marlowe. My name is Dante Moretti. I wanted to offer my condolences personally." The name meant nothing to her. "Did you know Caleb?" "We worked together," he said. Elena frowned. "Caleb was a valet at the casino." Dante's expression didn't flicker. He also did some private work for my organization." "Organization?" "He was a good man," Dante continued, smoothly ignoring her question. "What I admired most about him was his loyalty. He was deeply loyal." That word again. It felt wrong. Caleb had been loyal to nothing, not to his family, not to himself. What had he been loyal to? "I don't understand," she said, blunt with confusion and grief. "Why were you at the funeral? Why did you sit with me?" "Because," Dante said, his dark eyes finally meeting hers. "No one should have to sit alone when they are saying goodbye." His gaze was intense, heavy. He wasn't just looking at her, he was seeing her, and the depth of that attention was both terrifying and intoxicating. "Mommy, you dropped Bun Bun." Sophie wriggled out of her arms and pointed at the ground. Her small, stuffed white rabbit had fallen into the mud, before Elena could even bend. Dante moved. He was surprisingly fast. He knelt, scooping up the toy. He didn't hand it back. He knelt on one knee in the wet grass, holding the soiled rabbit, and looked at Sophie. "He's a little dirty," Dante said, his voice softer than Elena would have thought possible. "But I think he's very brave." Sophie, who was usually shy to the point of silence around strangers, stepped forward. "His name is Bun Bun. He's my best friend. It's a pleasure to meet you." "Bun Bun," Dante said, addressing the rabbit with perfect seriousness. He used a pristine white handkerchief from his suit pocket to wipe the worst of the mud from the rabbit's white fur. Elena watched, stunned. Her daughter, her painfully shy child, giggled. "You're funny," Sophie declared. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of Dante's mouth. It transformed his face, making him look, for a split second, devastatingly human. He handed the rabbit back to Sophie, his large, manicured fingers brushing her small ones. "Thank you," Elena whispered, her throat tight. Dante rose to his full height, the hard, watchful expression returning. "You and your daughter should get out of this cold." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and produced a small, impossibly thick card. It was blank, save for a single string of 10 digits embossed in black. "This is my personal number," he said. He didn't offer the card. He gently took her free hand, the same one he had held in the chapel, and pressed the card into her palm, closing her fingers around it. "If you need anything, anything at all." He held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. Miss Marlowe. Miss Sophie. He turned and walked back to his car, his movements economical and silent. The car started without a sound and pulled away, disappearing into the gray afternoon. Elena stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into her bones, her hand clutching the card so tightly the embossed numbers dug into her skin. Her daughter was wrong. He wasn't a nice man. He was the most dangerous man she had ever met. That night, the illusion of safety shattered completely. Elena had put Sophie to bed hours ago, after a dinner of macaroni and cheese they'd barely touched. The small, one-bedroom apartment was quiet. The only sounds the ticking of the kitchen clock and the rain against the glass. She had finally managed to fall into a fitful, shallow sleep around 11 o'clock, only to be jolted awake by a sound, a scrape, metal on metal. She lay frozen, her heart leaping into her throat. It came again. From the front door, someone was trying to get in. She slid out of bed, her feet landing silently on the cold floorboards. Her first thought was Sophie. She crept down the tiny hallway to the living room, which doubled as her bedroom. The flimsy deadbolt on the front door was rattling. A loud crack splintered the wood of the door jamb. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She ran to Sophie's room. Her daughter was still asleep, curled around Bun Bun. Elena scooped her up, a bundle of warm limbs and sleepy murmurs. "Mommy, shh, baby, stay quiet." She backed into the corner of the room, fumbling for her phone on the nightstand. The front door crashed open, hitting the wall. Heavy footsteps entered the apartment. 2 sets, maybe 3. Elena clamped her hand over Sophie's mouth, her own breath held tight. She heard them moving, drawers being ripped open, the sound of her meager belongings being thrown to the floor. They weren't robbers. They were searching. She was dialing 911. Her thumb shaking so badly she could barely hit the screen, when a shadow fell across Sophie's doorway. A man stood there, a dark silhouette against the hallway light. Elena screamed, a raw, terrified sound. The man grunted, surprised, and took a step in. "Just the kids' room." "Check it." Another voice barked from the living room. The man raised his hand. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, pulling Sophie behind her. "Hey, what the hell's going on?" A voice yelled from the hallway outside. It was her neighbor, Mr. Henderson. "Cops!" the man in the doorway yelled. He scrambled backward. "Let's go!" The footsteps thundered out of the apartment. A door slammed shut somewhere down the hall. Elena was left shaking, hyperventilating in the dark, clutching her now crying daughter. It took the police 40 minutes to arrive. 2 officers, looking bored and tired, walked through her ransacked apartment. They shined flashlights on the splintered doorframe. "Anything taken?" the older one asked. "Chewing gum." Elena looked around. The small television was still there. Her laptop was still on the kitchen counter. Her wallet was untouched on the coffee table. I don't think so," she stammered. "Probably junkies," the officer said, writing in his notepad. "Looking for a quick score. Got spooked." "They were searching," Elena insisted. "They pulled out all my drawers. They took a picture." The officer looked up. "A picture?" "From the mantel," she said, pointing. "A picture of my brother, Caleb." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, it was probably just in the way." "Look, we'll file a report. You should get that door fixed. Get a better deadbolt." They left. Elena was alone. The door wouldn't lock. The frame was destroyed. The rain was still falling. She was trembling. A deep, bone-chilling terror she couldn't control. They hadn't found what they were looking for. They would be back. She looked at the phone in her hand. The police were useless. Her family wouldn't answer. She had no one, except... She pulled the thick card from her jeans pocket. 10 digits, a lifeline. Her thumb hovered over the numbers. Calling him felt like making a deal with the devil. But the devil had been at the funeral. The devil had held her hand. The fear of not calling him was suddenly greater than the fear of calling him. She dialed. It rang once. Yes. Not a hello, but a sharp, immediate response. It's Elena Marlowe, from the funeral. Caleb's sister." A beat of silence. "What's wrong?" Someone broke in, she choked out, the tears finally coming. They broke my door. The police came. They left. But the door, it's broken. I have my daughter here. I don't know what to do. Where are you? His voice was cold, sharp, and all business. She gave him the address. Lock what's left of the door. If you can, move you and your daughter into the bathroom. Don't open it for anyone but me. How will I know it's... You'll know, he said, and the line went dead. She did as he said, barricading herself and Sophie in the small, windowless bathroom. She sat on the tile floor, Sophie in her lap, listening to every creak of the building. 7 minutes. That's all it took. She heard a car, a heavy engine idling, then cutting out, she heard footsteps, not in the hall, but on the stairs, fast and light, a knock, not on her door, but on the splintered frame. Elena. His voice. She sagged in relief. She unhooked the flimsy lock on the bathroom door and crept out. Dante Moretti filled the doorway. He wasn't in the suit. He wore dark jeans, boots, and a black Henley that stretched across his shoulders. He looked less like a businessman and more like a hunter. His eyes swept over her, then over Sophie, checking for injuries. He stepped inside, past her, his gaze taking in the violation of her home in one sweeping glance. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. "You're safe," he said. It wasn't a reassurance. It was a promise. He walked through the apartment, his movements methodical. He checked the closet. He ran a hand over the broken window latch in the kitchen. He knelt and examined the shattered door jamb. He moved with a deadly, quiet efficiency that made the 2 police officers look like children. He found Sophie, who was peeking from behind Elena's legs. He knelt just as he had at the cemetery. "And they're gone, little one," he said, his voice that same unsettlingly soft rumble. "They're not coming back tonight. You promise," Sophie whispered. "I promise." He turned to Elena. "Where is your spare key?" In the kitchen junk drawer." He found it, then went back outside. She heard the sound of tools, of wood being hammered. He was fixing the door. After a few minutes, he came back inside. He had installed a heavy-duty slide bolt from a kit he must have had in his car. "It will hold for the night," he said. "You'll need a new door tomorrow." "Thank you," she said, her voice small. I can pay you for the..." His eyes snapped to hers, and she fell silent. "Go to your daughter," he said. "Get her to sleep." Elena nodded, taking Sophie back to her small room, tucking her into the sheets. She sat until Sophie's breathing evened out. When she emerged, Dante hadn't moved. He was standing by the broken mantel, his back to her. He was looking at the empty space where Caleb's photo had been. "They took his picture," she whispered. "I know," he said. He turned. "I will stay until dawn. You don't have to do that. You've fixed the door. I am staying." He walked to the single, worn-out armchair she owned, the one facing the front door. He didn't sit in it. He moved it, positioning it in the small hallway, directly in front of the door, and then he sat. He didn't turn on a lamp. He didn't look at his phone. He just sat, hands resting on his knees, watching the door he had just secured. A sentinel. Elena stood in the shadows of her kitchen, watching him. The moonlight, filtering through the blinds he had closed, cut across his face, all hard lines and dark hollows. He was the most terrifying man she had ever known. He was the reason her apartment had been invaded. She was sure of it. This loyalty he spoke of, this organization. Caleb had died for it, and now they were coming for her. He was the source of her danger. But as she watched him sit, silent and unmoving, a guardian at her gate, she couldn't stop the other treacherous feeling from rising in her chest. She had never, in her entire life, felt so completely and utterly safe. She didn't go to bed. She just leaned against the wall, her arms crossed over her chest, and watched the man who was both her nightmare and her protector, waiting for the sun to rise. The days that followed were brittle. Dante had a new, reinforced door installed by silent, efficient men before the sun was even fully up, but the splintered wood was a memory etched into Elena's mind. Every time the floorboards in the hallway creaked, her heart seized. Every car that slowed on the street below made her stop breathing. She was living on a wire, and the tension was making her fray. She first saw the man 4 days after the funeral. She was walking Sophie to the small park 2 blocks over, a desperate attempt to reclaim some sliver of their old life. He was sitting in a gray sedan across the street, reading a newspaper. He was unremarkable in every way, which was precisely what caught her eye. When she walked Sophie back 2 hours later, he was still there. The newspaper was folded on his passenger seat. He was just watching. He wasn't one of the men who had broken in. He wasn't a police officer. He was something else. He was there the next morning when she left to get milk. He was there in the evening, parked in the alley behind her building, his silhouette visible against the setting sun. A cold, clarifying anger began to push through her fear. This wasn't protection. It was possession. He had marked her. Dante Moretti had laid some invisible claim on her life, and she was now a prisoner in a cage she couldn't see. That evening, she left Sophie with Mrs. Henderson for 30 minutes, promising her neighbor it was an emergency. She walked straight down the alley, her keys clutched in her hand, the metal biting into her palm. She stopped 10 feet from the car. The window slid down, silent and electric. The man inside didn't look at her. "You should go inside, Miss Marlowe," he said, his voice flat. "It's not safe out here." "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking but loud. "Just a guy," he said, finally turning. His eyes were bored. "Headed home. You've been headed home for 2 days. You work for him, don't you? For Dante." The man's face tightened. "Ma'am, please get back inside." "I want him to come here," she said. "I want him to tell me why. You tell him that. You tell him I'm not some property he can guard." The man sighed, pulled out a phone, and typed a message. "He's not going to like that." "I don't care." She stormed back upstairs, her blood roaring. She was so furious she was shaking. 10 minutes later, her phone rang, the number she had stared at for an entire night. "You're upset," Dante said. It wasn't a question. "You put a man in my alley, Dante. You have me watched like a criminal. You don't have that right." There was a pause. "No, I don't. But I have the responsibility. He's there because the men who broke into your home will be back." The police said. "The police are wrong," he cut in, his voice sharp. "They weren't junkies. They were professionals. They were looking for something. Elena. Something your brother was protecting." Her breath hitched. "What? What was he protecting?" "That's what I'm trying to find out. They didn't find it, which means they still think you have it." The anger was draining away, replaced by the familiar, cold dread. Caleb and we didn't talk. He never gave me anything." "Think," Dante commanded, his voice intense. "Did he leave anything with you? A package? A key? Did he ask you to hold on to a laptop? A hard drive? Anything at all in the last few months?" "No, nothing." Another silence. This one was heavier. "They took his photograph. Elena. They were making sure they had the right family. They won't stop." She sank onto her sofa, the phone pressed hard to her ear. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you and Sophie to have dinner at my home tonight. We need to talk. Properly. I will send a car in 1 hour. I can't just drop." 1 hour, he said, and hung up. The house was not a house. It was a fortress of old stone and dark ivy, set back from the road on a hill overlooking the city's glittering lights. It was quiet, imposing, and cold. The man who had been in her alley, she now knew his name was Franco, opened the car door and led her and Sophie up the wide stone steps. Dante was waiting in the foyer. It was a cavernous space, all dark wood and polished marble, with a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a museum. He was dressed as he was at the funeral, in a suit that spoke of quiet, generational wealth. "Mommy, this is a castle," Sophie whispered, her eyes wide. A flicker of that rare smile touched Dante's mouth. "Welcome to my castle, Miss Sophie." He knelt, just as he had at the cemetery. I'm told you like macaroni and cheese. I had my cook make a special batch." Sophie giggled and hid behind Elena's leg. The dinner was the most surreal experience of Elena's life. They sat at one end of a dining table that could have seated 30. The room was silent save for the clink of silverware on porcelain. Sophie, perched on a stack of leather-bound books so she could reach the table, happily ate her dinner. Elena pushed a piece of chicken around her plate, her stomach in knots. "Caleb was my most trusted courier," Dante said, his voice low in the vast room. He had barely touched his own food. A courier? He was a valet. That was his cover. He was smart. He was fast. He was loyal. There was that word again. Loyal to what? Dante? To this? She gestured at the opulent room, at the silent men who had opened the doors. What world was he in? Dante's eyes were hard. My world, and he was in trouble. He came to me 2 months ago. He said he had misplaced something, a ledger, something that belonged to me, but that our rivals would kill for. Rivals, she repeated, her blood running cold. I didn't believe him. I thought he was stealing from me. I was angry. I told him to find it, or not to come back. That was the last time I spoke to him. The guilt in the room was a tangible thing, settling over the table like a pall. He wasn't stealing? Elena whispered, a sudden, fierce certainty rising in her. He wouldn't. No, Dante said, his gaze dropping to his plate. He wasn't. He was hiding it. He knew they were close. He was trying to protect it, and then he was killed. A car accident. That's what the police said. It wasn't an accident. No, it was not. And now, those same rivals. A man named Marcus Vento believed Caleb passed the ledger to the only person he ever talked about. Me? The idea was ludicrous. He never talked about me. You were all he talked about, Dante said, his voice raw. His sister, who was raising a kid on her own, the sister he was so proud of, the sister he had to get back to. Elena's eyes burned, the brother she thought had forgotten her. I don't have it, she insisted, her voice breaking. I have nothing. But they don't believe that, Dante said. And they will not stop. Not until they have the ledger, or they are certain you don't. Why are we looking at the books? Sophie suddenly piped up. She had finished her dinner and slid off her makeshift booster seat, wandering over to a massive, built-in bookshelf. These books are boring. Sophie, baby, come back here, Elena said, trying to pull her from her thoughts. This book is boring, Sophie announced, pulling a heavy, leather-bound volume from a low shelf. It doesn't have any pictures. Uncle Caleb's magic book has pictures. Elena froze. Every muscle in her body went tight. Dante's head snapped up. His entire demeanor, which had been heavy with remorse, vanished. He became a predator, perfectly still, his focus absolute. What did you say? Sophie? Dante's voice was a whisper, but it echoed in the silence. My magic book, Sophie said, dropping the heavy volume with a thud. Uncle Caleb gave it to me. Dante's dark eyes locked onto Elena's. They were no longer remorseful. They were blazing. What is she talking about? It's nothing, Elena said, her heart hammering. It's a toy, a sketchbook. He gave it to her months ago. Before everything. Where is it? At home, in her backpack. What does it look like? It's just a blank notebook, Elena explained, frustrated. The kind you buy at an art store. He used to draw in it for her, little sketches, maps for treasure hunts, buildings, and just scribbles. He called them his coded sketches. It was a game they played. Dante stood up so fast his chair scraped against the marble floor, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. He looked at Franco, who was standing by the door. Get the car. He looked back at Elena. We're going back to your apartment, now. An hour later, Sophie was asleep in her own bed, clutching Bun Bun. The apartment was quiet again, but the air was electric. The notebook sat on the kitchen table. It was exactly as Elena had described, a simple, black, hardcover sketchbook. Most of the pages were blank, but interspersed were pages of Caleb's drawings. They were intricate, precise. One page showed what looked like the floor plan of a warehouse. Another was a series of arrows and numbers. Another was just a sketch of a waterfront, but with specific buildings circled. They meant nothing to her. To Dante, they were the Dead Sea Scrolls. He traced a drawing of a pier with his finger, his face pale with concentration. He wasn't a courier, Dante murmured. He was my archivist. He knew everything, where the money was, where the weapons were moved. He mapped it. He mapped my entire organization. He did this for you? He did this to protect it, Dante said. And when he knew Vento was closing in, he hid it. Not in a vault, not in a bank. He hid it with the one person no one would ever think to look. He hid it in a 6-year-old's backpack. Elena sank onto a kitchen chair. He endangered my daughter. He put this target on her back. He was trying to protect you, Dante said, looking up at her. His eyes were dark, filled with an emotion she couldn't name. He was giving you a life insurance policy. If Vento got to him, this book was his leverage. It's not just a map. It's a bomb. It could destroy Vento. It could destroy me. He closed the book, and he gave it to you. The weight of it was crushing. Her brother hadn't just been a valet. He had been a player in a game she couldn't comprehend, a game that had gotten him killed, a game that had her and her daughter as the new centerpiece. Tears of anger and grief and sheer, overwhelming terror began to fall. She wasn't just crying, she was unraveling. I can't, she choked out, burying her face in her hands. I can't do this. I'm just a mom. I can't. She felt him move. He didn't sit. He knelt in front of her chair, so his eyes were level with hers. He didn't touch her. Not yet. Yes, you can, he said, his voice low and fierce. You've been raising her alone, fighting off a world that turned its back on you. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Elena. She looked up at him, her vision blurred by tears. How do you know that? Because your brother told me. He reached up, his hand hesitant. He didn't wipe her tears. He simply rested his large, warm hand on the side of her face, his thumb stroking the curve of her jaw. His touch was not forceful, not possessive. It was respectful, cautious. He's the reason, Dante said, his voice barely a whisper. He's the reason I was at the funeral. I was coming to find you, to apologize, to tell you I was wrong about him. Dante, she breathed. The air between them was thick, charged with the revelations of the night, with the shared grief, with the undeniable, terrifying pull that had been there since the chapel. She was afraid of him, of his world, of the danger he represented. But in this moment, he was the only solid thing in her universe. He leaned in, slowly, giving her an eternity to pull away. She couldn't. His lips touched hers, touched. It was not a kiss of passion, not a kiss of demand. It was a kiss that asked a question. It was slow and tender and deeply, achingly sad. It was a kiss of shared solitude, of two people who had been alone in the back pew of their lives for too long. His lips were firm and warm, and they tasted of the expensive wine he'd had at dinner, and of regret. She felt a jolt, a profound, emotional connection that went deeper than skin. It was terrifying. She broke it off, pulling back so fast she almost hit the wall. She put her hands up, a barrier between them. I can't, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's too much. My brother is dead. Men are chasing me. You're... I know, he said. He didn't try to close the distance. He stood up, stepping back, giving her the space she craved. His expression was unreadable, but his hands were clenched at his sides. I can't be this person, she said, more to herself than to him. I can't be the woman who kisses a mafia boss in her kitchen while her daughter sleeps in the next room. I see you, Elena, he said, his voice quiet, and I understand. He took a step toward the door, then paused. I'll wait. What? I'll wait, he repeated, looking over his shoulder, until you're ready. But I'm not leaving you alone. He left, and she was left shaking in her kitchen, the feeling of his lips still burning on hers. The next day, the fragile bubble of their new reality burst. Dante's men were no longer discreet. Franco, the man from the alley, was parked directly in front of her building, in plain daylight. Another man was at the end of the block. Elena tried to maintain a routine. She had to. She took Sophie to the park, the same walk they always did, acutely aware of the gray sedan following them at a safe distance. It was on the walk home that it happened. They were half a block from her apartment. A black sedan she didn't recognize, with windows so dark she couldn't see inside, turned the corner. It slowed. Elena's hand tightened on Sophie's. "Walk faster, baby!" The car kept pace. Franco's car, which had been behind them, was now blocked by a garbage truck. The black sedan sped up, its engine roaring, and swerved toward the curb. Toward them. Elena screamed, pulling Sophie against her, stumbling back against a brick wall. The car's door was opening, a man starting to get out. A screech of tires tore through the air. Franco's gray sedan, having mounted the curb and driven on the sidewalk to get around the truck, slammed into the black car's side, a violent, crunching impact of metal on metal. It wasn't a T-bone. It was an intercept, a deliberate block. The black car's engine screamed as the driver threw it in reverse, tires smoking, and sped backward down the street, disappearing around the corner. Franco was out of his car before the dust settled. His face was white. He ran to Elena, ignoring the dented fender of his own car. "Miss Marlowe, are you okay? Is the girl okay?" Elena was hyperventilating, her entire body locked, clutching Sophie so tightly her daughter was crying. "Get in the car," Franco said, his voice urgent. He didn't wait for an answer. He picked up Sophie himself, unclipped his radio from his belt, and shouted into it. "Code 7, Vento is on her. I repeat, Vento is on her. I'm taking them to the house." He bundled them into the back of the car, jumped in the front, and sped away from the curb. Elena looked back at her small, quiet street, at her apartment building. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that she would never be going home again. The tension had finally snapped. The safe house was a lie. It was called a house. It looked like a house, but it was a prison made of rustic wood and expensive, shatterproof glass. It was nestled in the hills, 40 minutes outside the city, surrounded by a dense forest of pine and oak. There was no alley to watch, no neighbors to hear a scream, just trees, a high-tech fence Elena couldn't see, and Dante's men, who materialized from the woods like ghosts. Dante did not stay. He brought them there, walked the perimeter with Franco, and then left, his black sedan disappearing down the long gravel driveway. Elena and Sophie were left in the care of a quiet, older couple, Maria and Sal. They cooked, they cleaned, they smiled, and they never, ever left the main house. For the first 3 days, Elena vibrated with a useless, frantic energy. She had lost her job. Dante had arranged for an extended paid leave of absence. She had lost her home. All her belongings had been put in storage, except for a few suitcases of clothes and toys. She had lost her independence. She was a bird in a beautiful, wood-paneled cage. She spent her time pacing the wide plank floors, watching Sophie draw at a kitchen table that was larger than her entire old living room. She was terrified. She was grateful. And she was furious. The emotions warred within her, leaving her exhausted and raw. Dante returned on the 4th day. He arrived not in a suit, but in jeans and a dark gray Henley. Much as he had the night of the break-in, he didn't knock. He simply walked in, his presence immediately shrinking the spacious living room. "Mommy, Dante's here," Sophie yelled, scrambling down from her chair and running to him. Elena's heart stalled. Sophie launched herself at him, wrapping her small arms around his leg. Elena waited for the awkward pat on the head, the stiff, uncomfortable rejection. Instead, Dante put a hand on Sophie's hair, his large fingers gently stroking her head. He looked down, and that brief, rare smile touched his mouth. "Hello, Miss Sophie. Did you keep an eye on the place for me?" "Uh-huh. I saw a deer. It was in the yard, and Maria made cookies." "Good," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A perimeter patrol and a supply check. You're a natural." He knelt, bringing himself down to her level. I brought you something." He pulled a small, hardcover book from his back pocket. It was The Little Prince. "It was my sister's favorite," he said, his voice quiet, his eyes on the cover. "Will you read it to me?" Sophie asked. "Later," Elena cut in, her voice sharper than she intended. "Dante is busy. He's here to talk to me." Dante's gaze lifted, meeting hers. The softness was gone, replaced by that unreadable, watchful stillness. "I can be here for both." And he was. He spent an hour sitting on the floor with Sophie, reading the story, his deep voice patiently explaining the drawings of the boa constrictor and the elephant. Elena watched from the kitchen, a dish rag clutched in her hand, her heart a tangled mess of confusion. He was a killer. He was a mafia boss. He was the man who had brought this storm into her life, and he was on her floor, patiently explaining stars and volcanoes to her fatherless child. She saw the man who had held her hand at the funeral, the protector. She hated how much her body, her treacherous, lonely heart, responded to the sight. That night, a storm rolled in. It wasn't a city storm, muffled by buildings. It was a wild, country storm. The wind howled, and the rain lashed against the house in sheets. The power flickered twice, then went out, leaving the house lit only by the crackle of the fireplace and the emergency lanterns that clicked on in the hallways. Maria and Sal had retired to their quarters. Sophie was fast asleep, clutching Bun-Bun, untroubled by the wind. Elena was in the living room, curled on the sofa, a blanket over her knees, watching the trees bend and sway in the flashes of lightning. "It's safe," a voice said from the darkness. She jumped, a small cry escaping her. Dante was standing in the doorway, a shadow against the dim emergency light. She hadn't heard him approach. "The windows are reinforced," he said, walking into the room. "The storm can't get in. But you can," she said, her voice small. "You move like a ghost." He didn't apologize. He walked to the fireplace, picked up the iron poker, and stoked the embers, sending a fresh cascade of orange sparks up the chimney. "You should sleep," he said. "I can't, not when it's like this." She pulled her knees tighter to her chest. "It's too loud, too much time to think." He turned, the firelight catching the hard planes of his face. "What do you think about?" She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Everything. My old apartment, my job, my ex, the one before Sophie, the one who wasn't her father, but who tried to be, for a while." He was silent, but he was listening. He leaned against the stone mantel, his arms crossed. He wasn't going anywhere. "His name was Mark," she whispered, the name tasting like ash. "He was so charming. My family loved him. He bought me flowers, and then, when no one was looking, he'd grab my arm, just a little too tight. He'd check my phone. He'd tell me the clothes I wore were inappropriate, that I was lucky to have him." She stared into the fire, the memories she kept locked away now spilling into the dark, storm-filled room. "The night I left, he'd been drinking. He didn't like what I'd made for dinner. He threw the plate against the wall, and then he pushed me. I fell. I was 7 months pregnant with Sophie." Dante's posture changed. He didn't uncross his arms, but his entire body went rigid, a statue of coiled fury. "I left that night," Elena continued, her voice thick. "I never went back. I went to my parents, my father. He told me I'd made my bed. He said I had embarrassed Mark, and I should go back and apologize." "And your brother?" Dante asked, his voice a low growl. A single tear traced a hot path down her cheek. "Caleb, he was the only one. He was a mess himself, always in trouble. But he showed up at 3 a.m. at the bus station. He gave me every dollar in his wallet, $312. He said I was the only good thing in the family. He told me to run and never look back. And I did. I didn't even speak to him again. Not really. I let him drift away. I was so angry at him for being part of this. And now he's gone." She was sobbing now, the ugly, raw sobs of years of grief and fear. She waited for him to say something, to offer pity, to tell her it would be okay. Instead, He just let the silence stretch, his presence a dark, solid anchor in the storm. When she had finally cried herself quiet, her breath hitching, he spoke. His voice was rough. "My father," he said, "was a monster." Elena looked up, shocked. He was no longer looking at her. He was staring into the fire, but she knew he was seeing something else entirely. He drank. He was violent, and he hated weakness. My mother, she was a ghost in her own home. But my sister, Chiara, she was sunshine. She was like Sophie, all light, and he couldn't stand it. He couldn't stand her light. He uncrossed his arms. His hands were fists at his sides. I was 12 years old the first time he went for her. He was drunk. He raised his hand, and I grabbed a fireplace poker, just like that one. He nodded at the hearth. I told him if he touched her, I'd kill him. "Dante," she breathed. He laughed. He beat me so badly I couldn't walk for 2 days, but he didn't touch her, and he never touched her again. From that day, he knew. He knew I would. I grew up standing in doorways. I grew up listening to footsteps. I learned to be the thing in the dark that was scarier than him. He turned his head, his dark eyes so full of pain, finding hers. "I am not a good man. Elena, I know what I am, but I know how to protect what is mine, and I know how to stand between the monsters and the people they want to hurt." The gap between them, the few feet of floor, felt charged with an impossible voltage, the storm outside and the storm inside. He wasn't a good man. He was a man who understood. He had stood in doorways, just as he had stood in hers. She didn't know who moved first. Maybe neither of them. It felt like the air just pulled them together. She was off the couch, and he was there. His hands coming up to cup her face, his palms rough against her tear-stained skin. "You're not weak," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You're a survivor. So are you," she breathed. His eyes searched hers in the firelight, 1,000 unspoken questions passing between them. He was asking. She was answering. His mouth came down on hers. It was nothing like the first kiss. That had been tender, hesitant. This was desperate. It was raw. It was the collision of two people who had been starving for a single, safe touch. It was the storm inside meeting the storm outside. His lips were firm and hot, moving against hers with a desperate, pent-up need that mirrored her own. She tasted the rain on him, the smoke from the fire, the salt of her own tears. Her hands, which had been at her sides, flew up, tangling in the thick hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. He groaned, a low, animal sound in his chest, and his arms wrapped around her. One hand splayed across her back, pulling her flush against the solid, hard wall of his chest. The other slid down, settling on her waist, his grip possessive, grounding. He broke the kiss, but only to press his forehead against hers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Elena," he breathed, like a prayer. "Don't stop," she whispered. It was all the permission he needed. He lifted her, his arms sliding under her legs as if she weighed nothing, and carried her from the room. He didn't take her to her bed. He took her to the master suite, which had been empty until now. He laid her on the cool, dark sheets, the fire in his own hearth, the only light in the room. He followed her down, not crushing her, but caging her, his body a solid, warm presence above her. "I'm not him," he said, his voice a raw vow, his eyes boring into hers. "I will not hurt you. I know," she said. The night was slow and intimate and charged with an emotional current so strong it left her breathless. It was not a night of frantic lust. It was a night of discovery. It was his hands, calloused and strong, learning the shape of her. It was her fingers, trembling, tracing the old, thin scar she found along his ribs. It was a slow, deliberate shedding of armor, piece by piece. He kissed her neck, her collarbone, the curve of her shoulder, his lips worshipful, leaving trails of fire in their wake. And when they finally came together, it was a quiet, profound joining, a silent promise in the heart of the storm. It was a release, a surrender, and for one long, perfect night, a feeling of absolute, unassailable safety. Elena woke to the smell of rain-washed pine and the heavy weight of Dante's arm across her waist. It was morning. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside scrubbed clean and silent. She was warm. She was safe. She had never felt this way before. She turned slowly, not wanting to wake him. He was on his back, his face unguarded in sleep. He looked younger. He looked peaceful. Then, the cold, hard light of day crept in. What had she done? She had slept with the man who was the source of her danger. She had given herself to him. She slid from the bed, pulling the sheet with her. She found her clothes, dressed quickly, and fled the room. She found Sophie in the kitchen, already dressed, happily coloring in a book at the table. Maria was humming and making pancakes. "Mommy, I'm hungry." "Me too, baby." She sat, her mind reeling. She felt like a different person. She looked at her daughter, and a sudden, sharp memory hit her. "Sophie," she said, her voice strained. "Where's your backpack?" "In my room. Why?" "The notebook? The magic book Caleb gave you? Is it in there?" "Uh-huh." Elena's heart was pounding. She went to Sophie's room. The backpack was on the floor. She unzipped the main compartment, her hands shaking. She pulled out a coloring book, a handful of crayons, and Bun Bun. There it was, tucked in the front pocket, the black sketchbook. She had forgotten it. In the chaos of the move, she had packed it without a second thought, and Dante had been so consumed by the near abduction that he hadn't asked about it again. She brought it to the kitchen table. Just as Dante walked in, he had showered. He wore fresh jeans and a black t-shirt. His hair was damp. His eyes found hers. And for a second, the warmth of the night was there. Then he saw the book on the table. The warmth vanished. He was the boss again. "You found it," he said. "It was in her bag the whole time," Elena said, her voice numb. He sat, pulling the book toward him. He opened it, his face a mask of concentration. He turned past the first few sketches. Then he stopped. He was looking at the drawing of the waterfront. He was a genius, Dante murmured. "A goddamn genius." "What is it?" Elena asked, dread coiling in her stomach. "It's not just a map. It's a key." He pointed to the circled buildings. "This isn't a warehouse. This is a holding company. Ventos and this. This is the offshore account number, hidden in the waves, and this." He flipped the page, a drawing of a row of warehouses. "My warehouses," he said, a new, cold anger in his voice. "He didn't just map my assets. He mapped my vulnerabilities." He turned the page again, and again his face grew darker with every turn. "What is it?" Elena demanded. Dante looked up, his eyes black, all traces of the man from last night gone. "Coordinates, shipping manifests, account numbers for hidden funds, not just mine. Ventos, all of it, everything Caleb was protecting for me." "Protecting for you?" Elena's blood ran cold. She stood up, backing away from the table. This is what you wanted, isn't it?" "Elena, last night, was that just but part of it? Get me comfortable? Get me to trust you? So I'd hand this over?" The accusation was out before she could stop it, fueled by a lifetime of betrayal. From Mark, from her father. Dante stood, his chair scraping the floor. His face was thunderous. "You think I staged a storm? You think I faked that?" "How do I know?" she cried, her voice cracking. "I was a pawn. Caleb made me a pawn, and now you're using me. You weren't interested in me. You were interested in this, in your money, your weapons." "I didn't know the book was here," he roared, slamming his hand on the table. The book jumped. Sophie, at the other end of the table, gasped. They both froze. Dante's anger evaporated, replaced by a deep, weary shame. He looked at Sophie, then at Elena. "I didn't know," he said, his voice low, controlled. "I suspected you had something, but I did not know it was in this house. And last night had nothing to do with this." But the doubt was there, a poison in the air. I need space," Elena whispered, her heart breaking. "I need to think. Just get away from me." She turned and ran from the room. Dante watched her go, his jaw tight. He looked at the book, then at Sophie. He swept the book into his hands and walked out, his shoulders rigid. The rest of the day was a cold, silent hell. Elena stayed with Sophie, their every interaction strained. Dante was gone, in a study at the other end of the house, his voice a low, angry murmur on the phone. Night fell. Elena was putting Sophie to bed, the tension in the house so thick she could barely breathe. She'd been wrong to accuse him. She knew it. She'd seen his face. But she had been so hurt, so terrified. "Mommy?" Sophie whispered from her bed. "Is Dante mad at us?" "No, baby," Elena said, her throat tight. "He's not mad. Go to sleep." She kissed her daughter, turned off the light, and went to find him, to apologize. She was walking down the hall when she heard it, the sound of glass breaking. Not from a storm, but from force. It came from the kitchen. She flattened herself against the wall, her heart stopping. She heard a thud, a muffled voice. "Find the woman and the kid. Vento wants them, alive." They were inside. Elena didn't scream. She didn't think. She flew back to Sophie's room, locking the door. Her daughter was already sitting up, her eyes wide with fear. "Mommy? Shh." Elena scooped her from the bed. "We're going to play a game, the quietest game in the world." She ran to the back of Sophie's closet. Caleb. He had been a mess, but he had been smart. When he had visited her once, years ago, he'd told her, "Every room has 2 exits, Lena, even if you have to make one." Behind a false panel at the back of the closet, one she had only found by accident, was a small, dark space, a crawl space. She pushed Sophie inside. "Stay here. Be silent. Do not come out, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me? I'm scared. I know. Be brave for me. I'll be right back. Don't leave me. I have to lock it from the outside, baby. I'll be right here." She was lying. She pulled the panel closed, hearing Sophie's tiny, muffled sob. She grabbed a baseball bat from Sophie's toy chest. The doorknob to the bedroom rattled. "It's locked," a man shouted. A heavy boot kicked the door. The wood splintered. Elena stood, her back to the closet. The bat raised, tears streaming down her face. The door flew open. A man in black stood there, a gun in his hand. He smiled. "There she is." He took a step in. The first shot was so loud it deafened her. The man's smile vanished, replaced by a look of surprise, a red flower blooming on his chest. He fell forward. Dante stood in the hallway, smoke curling from the pistol in his hand. His face was a mask of pure, cold rage. "Get out!" another man yelled from the kitchen. Dante didn't flinch. He moved past Elena, pushing her back toward the closet. "Stay with her," he ordered. He moved into the hallway like a shadow. She heard 2 more shots, a thud, a cry, then silence. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The silence was heavier, more terrifying than the noise had been. "Dante?" she called, her voice a reedy whisper. He appeared in the doorway. He was breathing heavily. There was a long, red slash on his forearm, bleeding sluggishly. He was alive. She didn't run to him. She stumbled to the closet, her hands fumbling with the panel. She ripped it open. Sophie was huddled in the back, silent tears streaming down her face. Elena pulled her out, holding her, burying her face in her daughter's hair. Her whole body shaking in violent, uncontrollable spasms. Dante was there. He knelt, his gun on the floor, and put his good arm around both of them, pulling them against his chest. Elena looked up, her eyes meeting his, the shame, the guilt, the relief. It was so overwhelming she couldn't breathe. I'm sorry," she sobbed, the words torn from her. I'm so sorry." "Shh," he said, his voice rough, his hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. "I know. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere. You're safe. You're both safe." She sobbed into his chest, clutching her daughter, clutching her protector, the shame of her doubt as sharp as the terror she had just felt. He had been right. The monsters were real, and he was the only one standing in the doorway. The breach at the safe house was a violation. The move to the estate was an indoctrination. Dante's home, the castle Sophie had marveled at, was not a home. It was a command center. The wide marble foyer Elena remembered from that first tense dinner was now populated by men, Not just guards like Franco, but men in sharp suits who moved with the same predatory stillness as Dante. They were his inner circle, his lieutenants, and they were always there. Dante moved Elena and Sophie into a sprawling suite of rooms in the east wing, overlooking a walled garden. The glass was thick. The locks were biometric. It was the most luxurious prison she could have imagined. Here, she began to understand Dante's world. It was a world of whispered, urgent conversations in the hallway at 2 a.m. It was a world of loyalty so absolute it was terrifying. When Dante entered a room, men twice his age fell silent and waited. It was a world where power wasn't shouted. It was a low, steady thrum that emanated from Dante himself, coloring every interaction. Elena was the anomaly. The men watched her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She was the boss's woman, the outsider, the liability. But Sophie was a different story. She was 6 years old. She did not see lieutenants. She saw new people. She did not understand the tension. She only understood that the garden was beautiful and the kitchen staff, at Dante's command, would make her cookies in any shape she desired. The defining moment came one afternoon. Dante was in the library, a vast 2-story room of dark wood, in a tense meeting with 4 of his most senior men. Elena could feel the anger rolling out of the room from the hallway. And then Sophie, having escaped Elena's watch, toddled in. She was holding Bun Bun in one hand and the little prince in the other. The 4 men, hard-faced and scarred, froze. One of them, a silver-haired man named Ricardo, actually put his hand on the gun holstered under his jacket. Sophie ignored them all. She walked straight to the massive oak desk and tugged on the leg of Dante's jeans. "Uncle Dante," she announced, her voice piping loud in the heavy silence. "You promised to read the part about the fox." Elena stopped in the doorway, her heart in her throat, ready to apologize, to snatch her daughter away. The room was so quiet she could hear the clock ticking on the mantel. Dante, who had been staring at a map on his desk, turned his head. The hard, cold fury in his eyes did not vanish, but it shifted. It receded, like a tide pulling back. He looked down at Sophie. "The fox," he said, his voice rough. "He's the important one." Sophie insisted. One of the other men coughed, a strangled sound. Dante picked up the book from her hand. He didn't smile, but the tension in his shoulders eased. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth and deadly, "we will finish this after. My uncle duties are a priority." He pushed back his chair, scooped Sophie onto his lap, and opened the book. The lieutenants filed out of the room, their faces a mask of bewilderment. Franco, standing guard at the door, met Elena's gaze. His lips were pressed into a tight, flat line, but his eyes were laughing. From that day on, she was Miss Marlowe. But Sophie was the little boss. She melted them. She would ask men who had likely killed people to tie her shoe, and they would kneel and do it. She had, in her innocence, bypassed the fortress and claimed the king, and in doing so, had been given immunity by his entire court. With the immediate threat of Vento held at bay, Elena felt a new, strange sense of purpose. She had Caleb's notebook. She had been a pawn, but she refused to remain one. She began to work, sitting with Dante in his study for hours, tracing the lines her brother had drawn. He was trying to fix it, she whispered one evening, her fingers on a page that was not a map of assets, but a list of names. "What do you mean?" Dante asked. He sat beside her on the leather sofa, close enough that his knee brushed hers. "This drawing, it's not a warehouse. It's the back alley of the shelter I used to volunteer at. And this number. It's not an account. It's a donation routing, set up anonymously." They dug deeper. They found more. Caleb had been slowly, carefully siphoning money, not for himself, not for Vento. He had been creating ghost accounts to fund women's shelters, rehab clinics, and halfway houses for ex-cons. He had been using Dante's criminal organization as a piggy bank to undo the very damage it created. "He was building an escape hatch," Dante said, his voice raw with a respect he had not shown before. "Not just for you. For his own soul. Elena wept, not from grief this time, but from a fierce, burning pride. Her brother, the family screw-up, had been the most courageous of them all. He had died a martyr, not a lackey, but this new, fragile domesticity was a lie. The truce was not real. The tension in the organization was palpable. Ricardo, the silver-haired lieutenant, and a few others from the old guard did not trust Elena. They saw Dante's vow to find Caleb's good work as a distraction. They saw his softness with Sophie, his closeness with Elena, as a weakness Vento would exploit. Elena felt their eyes on her. She heard the whispers that stopped when she entered a room. They thought she was manipulating him. They thought she was a black widow, using her body and her child to turn the most feared man in the city into a family man. They were not entirely wrong. He was changing, and the change was making them vulnerable. The proof came on a sunny Tuesday. Elena was in the walled garden with Sophie. It was the one place she felt truly safe. The walls were 15 feet high, covered in ivy and guards. Franco, among them, patrolled the perimeter. Sophie was hiding behind a large stone urn, and Elena was pretending to look for her. Where? Oh, where? Could my Sophie... A sound, sharp and clear like a giant whip crack, echoed through the garden. A puff of stone dust exploded from the urn Sophie was hiding behind, exactly where her head had been 1 second earlier. Elena didn't even have time to scream. Franco's voice was a roar. "Sniper, get down! Get her down!" He was already moving, tackling Elena and Sophie, pulling them both behind a thick stone bench. Another crack, and a bullet screamed off the stone where they had just been. Men were shouting. Alarms blared across the estate. Elena, her ears ringing, was crushed under Franco's body, her arms wrapped so tightly around Sophie she was afraid she'd break her. Dante was there in less than a minute. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing body armor. His face was not the face of the man who read The Little Prince. It was the face of the man who had sat in her hallway, a killer. "Is she hit?" he barked, his eyes scanning them, frantic. "No," Franco said, rolling off. "We're clear." It came from the woods, east. "Get them inside. Lock it down. I want a perimeter sweep. Find him." Dante snarled. "And bring him to me." He pulled Elena to her feet. She was shaking so violently she couldn't stand. He swept Sophie into his arms, his body a shield, and all but dragged Elena back into the house. He didn't stop until they were in the master suite, the doors locked, the heavy curtains drawn. Sophie was crying, a terrified, silent wail. "It's okay," Dante said, his voice strained, his hands checking Sophie for injuries he might have missed. "You're okay. You're safe." Elena just stood in the middle of the room, her body frozen, her mind replaying that puff of stone dust. Dante turned to her, his face a mask of cold, lethal rage she had never seen directed at her. "He's done," Dante said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "Marcus Vento, he's done. What are you doing?" she whispered, seeing him check the ammo in a pistol he'd pulled from a hidden drawer. "I am ending this. I am going to war." "No," the word was torn from her. "No more killing. Dante, look at me. This isn't... You can't just... kill him." He laughed. It was a cold, sharp, ugly sound. "Elena, you were in the garden. He tried to kill our daughter. Our daughter." The words hit her harder than the bullet. "And killing him will bring her back," she cried, finding her voice. "It won't. It will just make you him. It will make you the monster. Dante, don't do this. Don't do it. For me. Please." He stopped. He walked toward her, his face terrible in its stillness. He put his hand on her cheek, his thumb hard against her skin. "You don't understand," he said, his voice soft, but more dangerous than his roar. "You're asking me not to kill for your sake. I don't kill for your sake. I kill to keep you and Sophie safe. That's the only reason." He shook his head. "My world doesn't allow for second chances. Elena, he aimed at my family. He doesn't get to live." He turned and walked to the door. "If you do this," she whispered, her voice breaking, "the man who reads to my daughter, he'll be gone, and he'll never come back." He paused, his hand on the doorknob, his back to her. "He was never really here," he said, and left the room, locking her inside. She spent the next 8 hours in a hell of her own making. She could hear the house operating, a low, angry buzz of activity. Men were gathering, cars were arriving and leaving. He was gathering his army. He was going to war, and he might not come back. Or worse, he might come back as the man she had begged him not to be. He came to her late, past midnight. She was in his study. She had picked the lock on her door with a hairpin, a stupid trick she had learned as a teenager, and had come here, to the center of his power, to wait. He walked in, smelling of the cold night air and gun oil. He looked surprised to see her. He looked exhausted. "It's done," he said. "The preparations. We move at dawn." She didn't get up from his chair. "I'm terrified," she whispered. His face softened. The warlord was gone, replaced by the man who had held her hand in the chapel. "I've tripled the guards. You're safe here. Vento can't—" "I'm not terrified of Vento," she said, standing. "I'm terrified of losing you. I'm terrified you'll go, and you won't come back. Or I'm terrified you'll come back, and I won't know you. I can't lose you, Dante." The confession hung in the air, raw and desperate. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't kiss her. He just pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands, and buried his face in her hair. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, his voice thick. "I'm so sorry I brought this to you. Just be here," she pleaded, her hands fisting in his shirt. "Right now. Be here with me." His control snapped, his mouth came down on hers, and it was nothing like their first, tender kisses. It was desperate. It was aching. It was a raw, bruising, emotional claiming. It was the kiss of a man who was leaving for war, and a woman who was terrified he was right, that his world had no second chances. His hands were in her hair, tilting her head back. Her fingers were digging into his shoulders, trying to anchor him to her, to the moment. It was a kiss that tasted of fear and salt, and a love so profound it hurt. It was a silent, desperate plea from both of them. "Don't leave me. Come back to me. Stay." He broke the kiss only to lift her, his mouth trailing fire down her neck. She didn't protest. She clung. This was not about passion. It was about survival. It was about feeling him, whole and alive, one last time. It was a desperate, aching, emotional collision, a futile attempt to hold back the dawn. Later, in the quiet darkness of his room, they lay tangled in the sheets. The adrenaline faded, leaving only a bone-deep weariness. Elena was tracing the scar on his ribs, the one she had found that night in the safe house. "When this is over," he said, his voice quiet in the darkness. "It's over." She propped herself up on her elbow, looking at his silhouette in the moonlight. "What?" "This life. Vento. All of it, when he's gone." "I'm done. I'm selling it, disbanding it, whatever it takes." She couldn't breathe. "Dante, you can't. This is your family." "You," he said, his hand coming up to cup her face. "You and Sophie. You are my family. Caleb was right. He was trying to find a way out. I've just been too blind to see it." He kissed her, softly this time. "I'm leaving it. For you. A future." He was offering her a future. A real, normal, safe future. She laid her head on his chest, and for the first time, she let herself believe it. She let herself plan. A small house. A yard. Sophie in a normal school. A life. She cried silently into his chest, and he just held her, stroking her hair until the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the curtains. She woke, and she was alone. The bed was cold. Panic seized her. She sat up, clutching the sheet. It was morning. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She got up, pulling on Dante's shirt, and ran from the room. He was gone. The war had started. "Dante," she called, her voice echoing. She ran to Sophie's room, needing to hold her, to anchor herself. "Sophie, baby?" She opened the door. The room was bright, the curtains drawn. Sophie's bed was neatly made, but it was empty. "Sophie?" Elena's voice was sharp. "This isn't funny. Come out." She checked the bathroom. Empty. She checked the closet. Empty. A cold, sick dread, worse than the sniper's bullet, filled her veins. Franco, she screamed, running into the hall. Franco! He appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale. Ma'am? Where is she? Where is Sophie? Was she with Maria? Did Dante take her? Franco's eyes went wide. She's not with you. He was already speaking into his radio, his voice hard. Lockdown! Lockdown now! The girl is not in her room! Find the girl! Alarms began to blare, the same sound from the day before. Elena's knees buckled. She slid down the wall, the world tilting, the sound of her own heartbeat roaring in her ears. Dante's entire operation, his men, his cars, his weapons, all of it, ground to an absolute halt. The war with Vento was over before it began. A new war had just been declared. Elena collapsed on the cold marble floor, a single, agonizing scream tearing itself from her throat. Sophie was gone. The silence of the estate was a new kind of violence. The alarms had been shut off, but the quiet that replaced them was wrong. It was a suffocating, heavy vacuum, thick with the absence of a 6-year-old girl. Elena was on the floor in the hallway, her back against the cold marble wall, her legs unable to hold her. She was not crying. She was beyond tears, frozen in a state of catatonic shock. Men moved around her, a whirlwind of quiet, lethal purpose. Franco was on the phone, his voice a low, furious growl. Ricardo was directing guards, locking down the perimeter. Dante had not moved for 3 minutes. He stood in the center of the foyer, his back to her, a statue of pure, controlled rage. The war with Vento was gone. This was not war. This was an extermination. The house phone, the one on the heavy oak console, rang. The sound was so obscene in the silence that Elena flinched. Every man in the foyer froze. Dante turned, his face a mask of pale, cold fury. He walked to the console, picked up the receiver, and pressed a button, putting the call on speaker for all of them, for her to hear. "You have something of mine." Dante's voice was deathly calm. A laugh, oily and confident, filled the room. "Marcus Vento, and you, Dante, have something of mine. Very interesting little book. It seems my men at the safe house were unsuccessful, but as it turns out, I found a better incentive." "Mommy?" The sound of Sophie's voice, small and terrified, crackled over the speaker. Elena's body seized. A strangled, inhuman sound tore itself from her throat. She scrambled to her feet, stumbling toward the phone. "Sophie? Baby, I'm here, don't—" "Ah," Vento's voice oozed. "The mother. Good, you're both listening. The trade is simple. The girl for the book. You have 1 hour to bring it to the old shipyard. Pier 12. Come alone. Dante, or the girl dies. And I will make it slow." The line clicked. The dial tone buzzed. Dante slammed the receiver down, the crack of the plastic echoing in the hall. Elena turned on him, her shock shattering, replaced by a raw, agonizing grief that was indistinguishable from rage. "This is you!" she screamed, her hands balled into fists. "This is your fault. You and your world and your blood money. I brought her here to be safe. I let her call you uncle. You put this target on her back." She was hitting his chest, her blows weak, pathetic. "You did this. You did this." Dante didn't flinch. He let her strike him, his face carved from ice. He let her fury break, her sobs finally coming, a storm of self-hatred and despair. "It's my fault," she choked, collapsing against him. "I trusted you. She's my baby. He has my baby. It's my fault." He wrapped his arms around her, his hold so tight it was almost painful. Pulling her against his chest, he held her, his hand cradling the back of her head until her sobs quieted into ragged, desperate gasps. Then he set her away from him, his hands on her shoulders. His eyes were black, bottomless, and filled with a vow that was more terrifying than any threat. "This is not your fault. Elena, it is mine. I let him get close. I let this happen." He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I'm going to get her back." "He said to come alone," she whispered, her voice broken. "The book. I don't care about the book." He snarled. He looked past her, at his men, at Ricardo. "You are not to give him that book. Even if I am dead, burn it first. Do you understand? Ricardo nodded, his face pale. Dante looked back at Elena. I am going to get our daughter, and if I do not bring her back... He kissed her forehead, a hard, brief press of his lips. I will die trying. He turned and walked away from her, shrugging off his suit jacket, tossing it to the floor. Franco, stay with her. Boss, you can't go alone, Franco protested. I'm not, Dante said, pulling his phone from his pocket. He wasn't calling his lieutenants. He was going dark. He walked into his study and shut the door. Elena was left in the hall, a prisoner in the fortress that had failed to protect its smallest, most important charge. For 2 hours, Elena was left alone with her guilt. Franco stood outside her door, a silent, miserable sentinel. Dante was gone. He had not taken his armored sedan. He had not taken Ricardo or the other suited men. He had assembled his old crew. She had seen them arrive. They did not come in expensive cars. They came in battered trucks and on motorcycles. They were not men in suits. They were men in leather and denim, with faces that were maps of old scars and bad decisions. They were the men from his most violent days, the men he had supposedly left behind when he became the boss. They were the butchers, not the strategists. They had gathered in the library, and when they emerged, they were a small, silent army, armed not with pistols, but with heavy-caliber rifles and shotguns. Dante was at their head, dressed in black cargo pants and a dark Henley, his body encased in the same tactical body armor he'd worn after the sniper attack. He had not looked at her. He had not said goodbye. He had simply left, his face a mask of cold purpose. He was going to burn the world down to get Sophie back. Elena retreated to Sophie's room. The silence was a physical weight. She could still smell her. The faint, sweet scent of baby shampoo and strawberry lip balm. She fell onto the small bed, burying her face in the pillow, and wept. She clutched Bun Bun, the small, floppy-eared rabbit that had been Sophie's constant companion. It was the only thing that felt real. She held it, rocking back and forth, her grief a raw, physical ache. She squeezed the rabbit, her fingers digging into the soft, plush body, and she felt something hard. She froze. Her hand went to the rabbit's torso, inside the stuffing. There was a lump, small, square, and metallic. Her fingers, fumbling and desperate, found a seam in the rabbit's back, one that was stitched with thicker, clumsier thread than the rest. She ripped it open. A small, thin, digital voice recorder fell out onto the comforter. Her blood ran cold. She stared at it. It was old. The kind a journalist might have used 10 years ago. Caleb. It had to be Caleb. He had given Sophie the notebook. He must have given her this, too, hiding it inside her favorite toy. Her thumb, shaking, found the play button, a hiss of static, and then his voice, her brother. Lena, if you're hearing this, I'm probably dead. I messed up. Lena, I messed up bad. His voice was a whisper, filled with a frantic, terrified energy. I tried to fix it. I tried to clean some of it, but he found out, Vento. He's not like Dante. He's a snake. Elena held the recorder to her ear, her heart hammering. I hid the book. Caleb's voice whispered. I put it with Sophie. I'm sorry. I know it's a burden, but it's insurance. Don't trust anyone, not even Dante's people. One of them, I'm sure of it. One of Dante's inner circle is on Vento's payroll. I heard them on a call. I couldn't get a name, but he's in deep. He's feeding Vento everything. A pause. A sound of a door opening in the background of the recording. He's coming. Lena, I love you. Protect the girl. Protect. The recording clicked off. Elena stared at the wall, the recorder clutched in her hand, the safe house breach, the sniper, the kidnapping. It wasn't a failure of security. It was a betrayal. It was an inside job. Dante was walking into an ambush. She flew from the room, the recorder in her hand. Franco. He was at the door, his hand on his gun. Miss Marlowe, you need to stay. He's walking into a trap, she screamed, shoving the recorder at him. Caleb, he left a message. One of Dante's men is working for Vento. They're ambushing him. Franco, they are going to kill him. Franco's face went white. He didn't question her. He didn't ask for proof. He grabbed his radio. "Boss, do you read me? Abort. It's an ambush. Do you read?" Only static. "They've got jammers." Franco swore, his professional calm shattering. "He's dark." "Where is he?" Elena demanded. "The shipyard, Pier 12. You have to take me. We have to warn him." "I can't." The boss said. "The boss is about to die," she shrieked. "Oh, get the car, Franco, or give me the keys. I'm going, with or without you." Franco looked at her, at the raw, desperate fury in her eyes. He made a choice. "Stay behind me. Don't speak. And if I tell you to run, you run." He was already moving, pulling her down the hall, toward the garage. The shipyard was a graveyard of rust and shadows. Franco's car, the unarmored one, skidded to a halt on the gravel road a quarter-mile from the main pier. They could see them. Dante's crew. They were staged behind a stack of shipping containers, just outside the massive, corrugated metal warehouse that was Pier 12. They weren't moving. They were waiting. "Stay in the car," Franco ordered. "No," Elena said, unbuckling. "He'll listen to me." She was out, running on the uneven gravel, screaming his name. "Dante!" A man from the old crew, one with a face like a broken rock, grabbed her, his hand like a steel trap on her arm. "Get her back!" "Dante!" she screamed again, fighting him. "It's a trap! One of your men! It's an ambush!" Dante emerged from the shadows. His face, under the brim of a tactical helmet, was grim. "Elena, what did you do?" "He's in there," she sobbed, breaking free and running to him, grabbing the front of his body armor. "One of your men. Caleb. Caleb recorded it. He's working for Vento. He's feeding them information. This is a trap. They're waiting for you." Dante's eyes were cold. He looked at her, then at the men around him, his old crew, men he'd known for 20 years. "Who?" he asked, his voice low. "She doesn't know," Franco said, coming up behind her. "The recording just said, one of the inner circle." "Boss, she's hysterical." The man who had grabbed her said, "We're losing time. The girl." "Be quiet, Leo." Dante's gaze was sweeping, calculating. He was reevaluating every breach, every failure, every piece of bad intel from the last month. Then his eyes landed on Ricardo. Ricardo, his oldest lieutenant, the silver-haired man who had not been dismissed, who had been coordinating logistics from the estate, who had been alone, with access to every comms channel. "Ricardo," Dante said, his voice quiet, "you're on the line with the estate. What's the status?" Ricardo, who'd been standing near the back, cleared his throat. "It's chaos, boss. Like we expected." "And the jammer?" Dante asked. "Vento's jammer. It's strong, localized. How would you know that? Ricardo?" The lieutenant's face went pale. "Boss, I just assumed." "You assumed," Dante said. He took one step toward him. "You were the only one who knew about the safe house vulnerabilities. You were the only one who knew my route this morning, before I changed it. And you were the one who suggested I bring the old crew. Men you thought I couldn't control." "Dante, this is madness," Ricardo said, his hand twitching toward the gun at his hip. "She's poisoned you against us." "No," Dante said, his voice soft. "She just opened my eyes." Dante didn't draw his pistol. He drew the knife sheathed on his vest. He moved so fast Elena didn't even see it. He was a blur, a shadow closing the distance. Ricardo tried to draw his weapon. He was too slow. Dante's arm moved once, a short, brutal arc. Ricardo gurgled, a look of profound surprise on his face. He clutched his throat, blood pouring between his fingers, and fell. The old crew stared, silent and wide-eyed. Dante turned, wiping the blood from his blade on his pants. He didn't look at the body. "The plan is compromised," he snarled, his voice a low growl that carried in the cold, salt air. "They're not waiting for a trade. They're waiting for an execution. So we are not going to be quiet." He pulled a detonator from his vest. "We are going to be loud." He pressed the button. The side entrance of the warehouse, 100 yards away, exploded. A fireball of shrapnel and debris. The ambush was now a firefight. "Franco!" Dante yelled over the first shouts of gunfire from inside. "Take her to the south exit. We'll flush them to you. Go!" "Dante, no!" Elena cried. "Go!" he roared, pushing her at Franco. He turned to his crew. "They have my daughter. We are leaving no one alive." He raised his rifle and walked into the fire. The next 10 minutes were a blur of screaming, gunfire, and the smell of cordite. Elena and Franco crouched behind a rusted-out forklift as men. Vento's men, Dante's men exchanged fire in the cavernous warehouse. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Dante was not a man. He was a force of nature. He moved with a brutal, focused precision, his rifle firing in short, controlled bursts. He was not a boss. He was the killer who had protected his sister, the man who had stood in doorways. He was wounded. Elena saw him take a shot to the shoulder, the impact spinning him, but he didn't go down. He just raised his rifle and kept moving, a relentless, terrifying shadow pushing deeper into the warehouse. "Sophie!" His voice was a roar, louder than the guns. "Sophie!" "Dante! In here!" Vento's voice. Dante disappeared into a small office at the center of the warehouse. Elena broke from Franco's hold. "I have to." "Stay down!" She ran, dodging a burst of gunfire that sparked off the concrete beside her. She reached the office just as Dante kicked the door in. Marcus Vento was there, his face a mask of sweat and terror. He was holding Sophie, a pistol pressed to her small head. "One more step." "Dante!" Vento screamed. "And I swear I'll—" "You're a dead man," Dante said, his voice a low, cold promise. He was bleeding heavily from his shoulder, but his rifle was rock steady, aimed at Vento's face. "Mommy!" Sophie cried, seeing Elena in the doorway. "The book!" Vento shrieked, his hand shaking. I just want the book." "You're not going to use it," Dante said. "Let her go," Elena whispered, stepping into the room. Vento's eyes flicked to her. A fatal mistake. It was all the distraction Dante needed. He didn't shoot. He moved, closing the distance in one stride, his rifle smashing Vento's hand, breaking his wrist. Vento screamed, the gun clattering to the floor. Dante didn't kill him. He just grabbed Sophie, pulling her from the man's grasp and spinning, putting his own body between his daughter and the threat. "Get her!" he yelled at Elena. Elena lunged, grabbing Sophie, pulling her close. "It's okay, baby, Mommy's here. You're safe." Dante turned back to the cowering, whimpering Vento, and in the distance, sirens, loud, getting closer. "Dante!" Elena screamed. "The police!" Dante looked at Vento, then at her. He made his choice. "Franco!" he yelled. Franco was there, his gun out. "Boss, we gotta go, the old crew. They're gone. They scattered, but the cops are real." Dante was bleeding badly. He was unsteady on his feet. He stumbled toward Elena, his hand out. He touched Sophie's hair, his fingers slick with his own blood. "Go," he whispered to Elena. "Go, take her." "I'm not leaving you," she cried, grabbing his arm. "The police," Franco said, his voice urgent. "They're here." Red and blue lights washed over the shipyard, cutting through the smoke. "You have to go," Elena said. They'll arrest you." "Boss," Franco said, "now." Dante looked at her, his eyes filled with a universe of pain and regret. He was the man she had feared, the killer, the monster, and he had just saved her world. "I love you." He breathed. He was gone. Franco and another of his men grabbed him, dragging him toward a dark maintenance tunnel, disappearing into the earth just as the first police car skidded to a stop. Elena was left standing in the doorway, clutching her crying daughter, the notebook still safe in her pocket. She was alone, covered in smoke and blood, the sirens wailing as the entire world she had been dragged into collapsed around her. She was in a hospital, not as a patient but as a witness, a victim. Sophie had been checked. She was fine, miraculously, perfectly fine. She was asleep now, on the small hospital bed, clutching Bun Bun. Elena just sat, a coarse wool blanket draped over her shoulders. Staring at the wall, he was gone. A nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes, touched her arm. "Ma'am, you're shaken. Can I get you some water?" Elena just nodded. When the nurse left, she felt something in her hand. She was clutching something. It was small and damp and stiff. She uncurled her fingers. It was a piece of paper, folded into a tiny square. It was stained dark. Blood. His blood. He must have pressed it into her hand in that last frantic second. She unfolded it, her fingers trembling. It was a note, written in a strong, dark script. "I'll find you again when I've earned the right." She looked at her sleeping daughter, then at the promise in her hand. She brought the bloodied note to her lips, and for the first time since her daughter had been taken, Elena Marlowe wept for herself. 2 months, 61 days, a lifetime. The new apartment smelled of fresh paint and cheap, pine-scented cleaner. It was on the 3rd floor of a nondescript brick building in a city whose name she had picked off a map. There was a park across the street, a grocery store on the corner. It was relentlessly, beautifully, normal. She was Anne Thomas. Sophie was Chloe. The names were bland, colorless, a coat of paint over the vibrant, terrified people they had been. Sophie, in the way of a 6-year-old, had adapted. She was a small, resilient flower, capable of blooming in any soil. She had found the park. She had made a friend. She did not seem to remember the gunfire, the smoke, the terror. She only remembered that Dante had saved her and that he had gone away. For Elena, this was both a mercy and a torment. Elena lived in the waiting room. Her life was a series of quiet, protective rituals. She checked the locks 3 times before bed. She memorized the face of every person in the grocery store. She did not have a phone. She paid for everything in cash, the cash Franco had silently, respectfully, pressed into her hand at the bus station 2 days after the shipyard, a thick envelope and a single gruff order to disappear for his sake. She was a ghost, but ghosts have their own obsessions. She often looked at the objects on her dresser, the only true things she owned. A small, faded photograph of Caleb, his arms slung around her shoulders. From a time so long ago they were both still children, and beside it, a small, folded piece of paper, stiff and dark with his blood. "I'll find you again when I've earned the right." Caleb, Dante, and herself. 3 people bound together by loyalty, pain, and a protection that had cost all of them everything. Caleb had given his life, Dante had given his empire, and she had given her heart, and now lived in the empty space it had left behind. She did not know if he was alive or dead. The news had been full of it for a week, the implosion of the Moretti organization, the arrest of Marcus Vento, who had been found weeping in his own office, his wrist shattered, the power vacuum, the infighting, but of Dante, not a word. He had vanished, just as he'd promised. She was safe. Sophie was safe. She should have been happy, but the quiet was so loud. It was a Tuesday evening. She was giving Sophie a bath. The small bathroom filled with steam and the scent of lavender soap, the sound of happy, splashing water, and then a knock, not a sharp, authoritative rap, not the heavy fist of a cop or a threat. It was a quiet, hesitant knock, 3 short, soft taps. Elena's blood turned to ice. Every nerve in her body screamed. She stood up slowly, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. "Mommy?" Sophie asked, her voice small. "Who is it?" "Stay in the tub, baby," Elena whispered, her voice a reedy, thin sound. Don't make a sound." She crept from the bathroom, her bare feet silent on the cheap laminate floor. She grabbed the baseball bat she kept by the door, the one she had bought for a neighborhood league she had no intention of joining. She moved to the door, her breath held tight. She looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No, not empty. There was a man, but he was not looking at the door. He was leaning against the opposite wall, his head down, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He looked tired. He looked up, as if he could feel her gaze, and his face, distorted by the fisheye lens, filled her vision. Her breath left her in a single, painful gasp. The bat clattered to the floor. It was him, but it was not him. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by simple dark jeans and a gray Henley. the same as he'd worn in the safe house. The dark, swept-back hair was shorter, simpler. The shadow of stubble was gone. He was clean-shaven, and the power, the cold, dangerous aura that had radiated from him, it was gone. He was just a man, a tired, wounded man, standing alone in a hallway. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the locks. The deadbolt was stiff. It scraped, loud in the silence. She pulled the door open. Dante Moretti stood 5 feet away, but it felt like a mile. His eyes met hers, and the intensity she remembered was still there, but it was raw now, unguarded. He had been a fortress. Now, she could see the man inside. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, his gaze a desperate, hungry, apologetic thing. He was thinner. There were new, fine lines around his eyes. He had suffered. "You're real," she whispered, her voice breaking. I wasn't sure you'd be here," he said, his voice rough, unused. I checked. The bus station, Franco. He told me the state. How?" she choked out. "How did you find you?" He shook his head. "It didn't matter where you went. Elena, I would have found you. Are you—" She looked past him, down the empty, sterile hallway. Are you alone?" "Yes," he said. He took a single, hesitant step forward. "There's no one. There's nothing left. No guards. No organization. I don't understand. I did what I promised," he said, his voice quiet but fierce. "It's gone. I'm done. I sold it. I gave it away. I burned the parts that wouldn't sell. I took every dollar that he'd marked. Every bit of good he was trying to do. I funded it. All of it. The shelters. The clinics. It's done." He took another step. He was close enough now that she could smell him. Not expensive wool and metal. Just soap. Clean. Simple soap. "It took 2 months," he said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "To tear it all down. To make sure no one would ever come looking for you again, to make sure you were free of it, free of me." Tears were streaming down her face. Hot and silent. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had given up an empire, a legacy, a world of power. To keep his promise. She started, but she couldn't speak. "I'm not him anymore. Elena," he said, his eyes pleading. "I'm not the boss. I'm not anything. I'm just—" She didn't let him finish. She crossed the last 2 feet of floor, her hands coming up to his chest. She could feel his heart, hammering, a frantic, human rhythm beneath her palms. He was real. He was warm. He was here. "You were always mine," she whispered, her voice thick with all the love and rage and terror of the last few months. "Even when I hated you, even when I was terrified of you, you were mine." He broke. The control that had defined him for a lifetime. It shattered. A ragged sound, like a sob, tore from his chest. His hands came up, not to hold her, but to frame her face, his thumbs wiping at her tears, his own eyes wet. "Elena," he breathed, his forehead pressing against hers. "You're done," she said, her voice a vow. "You're done." He kissed her. It was not the desperate, passionate, aching kiss of the study. It was not the tender, hesitant kiss of the kitchen. This kiss was a reunion. It was slow. It was tearful. It was a release. It was 2 broken halves of a soul locking back into place. A feeling of coming home? His lips were soft, hesitant at first, and then he was kissing her, deeply, holding nothing back, and she was kissing him back. It was not passion. It was love. It was the taste of salt and promise and a future she had not dared to dream of. It was the kiss of 2 survivors who had finally found safe harbor. "Mommy, is that Uncle Dante?" A small voice cut through the spell. They broke apart, but he did not let her go. He kept one arm wrapped around her waist, anchoring her to him. Sophie stood in the doorway of the bathroom, wrapped in a bright yellow, duck-covered towel, her hair damp and spiked. She was rubbing her eyes. She looked at Elena, then she looked at the man holding her. Her face lit up. a sunrise after a long, dark night. "Uncle Dante!" She ran, a blur of yellow towel and damp feet, and launched herself at his legs, wrapping her small arms around his knees as tightly as she could. "You came back!" she shouted, her voice muffled by his jeans. "You came back!" Elena watched, her heart so full it ached. Dante's hand, which had been stroking Elena's back, went still. He looked down at the small girl clinging to him. He was trembling. He let go of Elena, and he knelt. He knelt on the cheap laminate floor of the apartment, bringing himself down to her level. He was no longer a boss, no longer a killer, no longer a legend. He was just a man, on his knees, in front of the two people who had become his entire world. He put his hands on Sophie's small, damp shoulders, and his eyes were wet. The man who had faced down snipers and armies, the man who had torn down an empire, was crying, silently. "Hello, Miss Sophie," he said, his voice thick, unrecognizable. Sophie beamed, her small, gap-toothed smile a weapon more powerful than any gun. She put her small hands on his cheeks, the way he had once done for her mother. "Are you staying forever now?" she asked. Her question simple, direct, and holding the weight of all of their futures. "Are you staying with us?" Dante looked at her, his heart in his eyes. He did not look at Elena. He just looked at her daughter, their daughter. "If your mom says yes," he whispered, his voice breaking. He turned his head, his gaze finding Elena's. He was holding his breath. He had offered her everything. He had laid his entire, broken, redeemed soul at her feet. He was waiting. Elena looked at the man on his knees. She looked at the child who was his, in every way that mattered. She looked at the open doorway, and the empty hallway, and the new life that was, for the first time, not a waiting room, but a home. She didn't have to speak. She just nodded, a single, slow, tearful nod. Yes, the final scene did not fade. It settled. The light from the setting sun was warm, orange, and peaceful. The sounds from the street below were just life. Cars, people talking, a dog barking on the small, worn-out sofa. The three of them sat. Sophie was in the middle, tucked under Dante's arm, her head resting on his chest. Elena was pressed against his other side, her legs tangled with his, her head on his shoulder, in his hands. He held the black sketchbook, Caleb's notebook. It was no longer a bomb. It was no longer a ledger. It was a storybook. "He was a good drawer," Sophie murmured, her finger tracing one of the intricate, coded sketches of a warehouse. "Yes, he was," Dante said, his voice a low, warm rumble in her ear. "He was a very, very smart man." "He was my brother," Elena said, her voice soft, her heart aching with a pride that had finally replaced the grief. Dante turned the page. He was not reading the codes. He was just remembering. The story was over. The violence, the fear, the blood. It was all a lifetime ago. This was the redemption. This was the quiet, hopeful note. This was the brother who had saved them all, and the boss who had given up the world to be a father. This was the single mom who had been shunned, and who had found the only family she had ever truly needed. This was them, together, starting over. Thank you so much for listening to our story. Single mom sat alone at a funeral. The mafia boss said, "Let me hold your hand." We are so grateful you joined us. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and say hello. For more stories that are dark, dangerous, and deeply romantic, please be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories. We want to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite part of Elena and Dante's journey? Let us know in the comments in English. We read every single one. Until next time.